Orphaned and shivering, the boy sat on the edge of the com's porch as though he had arrived from nowhere and belonged to nothing. Hattie saw him from the garden, her hands still dark with turned earth, a basket of sorry turnips hanging from her wrist. He could not have been more than 7. His coat was a man's coat, cut down and badly stitched, and it swallowed him entire. His boots were split at the toe. He sat with his knees pressed together and his eyes fixed on the dry grass, as if he were waiting for the ground to swallow him up. She set down the basket and walked toward him slowly, the way she moved toward a spooked animal. "You lost?" she asked. He looked up. His eyes were grey and very still. "No, ma'am. There's nowhere to be lost from." She had not expected that. She crouched in front of him so that they were at a level. "What's your name?" "Danny," he said. Then, after a moment, "Danny Price. But Price is gone now." Hattie felt the words move through her chest like cold water. She had heard of the Price family, a father and mother who had tried to stake a claim 20 miles east. Fever had taken them both before the summer broke. She had heard it from the preacher and thought it a sad thing and gone on with her own troubles, the way people do. Now the sadness was sitting on her porch with split boots and nothing left. "Are you hungry, Danny Price?" He looked at her as if no one had asked him that in a long while. "Yes, ma'am." She brought him inside and set a plate of cornbread and cold beans before him. He ate without hurry and without greed, which told her he had known real hunger and had learned not to show it. He kept his elbows off the table and said thank you when he was finished, and both of those things made her throat tighten. Someone had raised him careful. Now that someone was gone. She watched him from across the table and felt something she had not let herself feel since her husband Thomas died 3 winters past. That particular, aching want of a house that held more than one heartbeat. She was 34 years old. Thomas had wanted children, so had she. It had simply never come. She let Danny sleep that night in the small back room where she kept Thomas's tools. She made up the cot with the good quilt and left a candle burning low on the sill. Then she lay awake in her own room listening to the prairie wind and thinking about what a woman alone was supposed to do with a boy who had no one. The county would have opinions. The county always did. In the morning she thought of Micah Sloan. Micah ran the Sloan Ranch 2 miles north, the largest spread in the county. He was a quiet man, broad in the shoulder and careful with words. He had never married. Hattie had spoken to him a dozen times over 3 years, at the feed store, at the church social, once when she had needed help pulling a fence post from frozen ground, and he had come without being asked twice. He had done the work in silence and ridden away without expecting thanks, which she had respected. She told herself she was going to him because he was the most capable man nearby, and because a widow woman alone with a found child would be gossiped about and questioned. She told herself it was practical. She hitched her old mare and drove the wagon north with Danny beside her, quiet as a stone on the bench seat. Micah was splitting wood in his yard when they arrived. He straightened, set the axe down, and watched them come without moving. He had that quality, a stillness that never felt cold, only settled. "Hattie," he said. "Micah." She stepped down and introduced Danny without ceremony. She told him the boy's history plainly, leaving nothing soft or vague. Micah looked at the boy for a long moment. Danny looked back at him without flinching, which seemed to decide something. "You eaten today?" Micah asked him. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Combs fed me." Micah nodded. He looked at Hattie. "Come inside." She followed him into the house, leaving Danny in the yard with the chickens, whom he immediately began to study with solemn interest. The ranch house was spare but clean. A single tin cup on the table, a Bible with a cracked spine, a coat hook with one coat on it. Micah poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her without asking. "He can stay," Micah said. "I didn't come to hand him off," Hattie said quickly. "I only thought, you have room, and more hands would help once he's older, and I could come and I know why you came. He sat down across from her. His eyes were dark brown, and they did not look away. You came because you don't want to let go of him yourself, and you don't want to be alone in deciding what's right for him. She had not expected to be seen so clearly. She looked down at her coffee. I've been alone a long time, she said. So have I, said Micah. Outside, they could hear Danny talking to the chickens, explaining something to them in a low, serious voice. They both listened. Neither of them smiled, but the corners of Micah's eyes creased, and that was close enough. They worked out an arrangement that first day, simple and sensible. Danny would sleep at the ranch, where there was more space and safety. Hattie would come each morning and stay through supper. She would teach the boy his letters and see to what a woman sees to. Micah would teach him to work. There was no contract, only two people who both understood what the boy needed, making a quiet agreement because the boy needed it to be made. The weeks settled into a rhythm. Danny proved to be a fast learner and a steady worker for his size. He did not complain. He asked questions in a precise, quiet way that was entirely his own. By the third week he was helping Micah mend fence, small hands working beside large ones along the same stretch of wire. By the fourth week, he had memorized the first 10 letters of the alphabet and was deeply proud of it. He wrote them on a scrap of board with a charred stick and propped it against the window where the light could find it. Hattie found herself staying later each evening. The supper she cooked grew more careful. Biscuits instead of cornbread, dried apple preserves brought from her own cellar. She told herself it was for Danny. She was mostly honest with herself. She noticed small things about Micah, the way he listened when she spoke, fully and without interruption, the way he thanked her for meals in a plain voice that carried more weight than elaborate praise. The way he fixed the loose step on the porch one morning without being asked, without mentioning it, as though it were simply something that needed doing and he was the one to do it. The way he watched her cross the yard in the evenings with an expression she did not let herself look at directly, not yet. It was Danny who pushed things forward, as children will. One night in early autumn he sat between them at the supper table and looked at each of them in turn with his grey, assessing eyes. "Are you going to get married?" he asked. Hattie nearly knocked over her coffee. "Danny," Micah said in a tone that was not a scolding. "Because," Danny continued, "if you got married, then Hattie wouldn't have to go home every night, and you wouldn't make that face when she does." "What face?" Micah said. "The one you're making now," Danny said, and returned to his biscuit with the air of a man who has said his piece. Hattie did not look at Micah. She could feel the warmth in her own face and was grateful for the dim lamplight. After Danny was in bed, they sat on the porch in the cooling dark. The prairie stretched out before them, enormous and quiet, full of stars. "He's not wrong," Micah said finally. She did not answer at once. She laced her fingers together in her lap and listened to the last of the crickets working in the grass. "Thomas has been gone 3 years," she said. "I spent 2 of them waiting to stop feeling like half a person. The third I spent getting used to being whole on my own." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be less than whole." She looked at him then, in the dark, and found him watching her with that settled, patient look she had come to know. "What are you asking?" she said. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to stay, not just for the boy." He paused. "For me." She breathed the night air in. She thought about the single cup on his table, the coat hook with one coat. "Let me think on it," she said. He nodded. That was all. She drove home under the stars, and she thought about it, and she already knew. What she could not have foreseen was the storm that came 3 days later. It struck without warning, as the worst ones do. The sky turned green at midday, and the wind came screaming down from the north with a fury that bent the cottonwoods flat. Hattie was halfway to the Sloan Ranch in her wagon when the sky opened and the hail began, chunks of ice the size of walnuts hammering the earth, spooking the mare into a stumbling run she could barely control. She fought the horse to a standstill behind a shallow draw, her heart slamming against her ribs, hail raking the wagon bed like gravel thrown from heaven. She could not see 20 yards in any direction. She could not move forward or back. And Danny was at the ranch, alone, because Micah had ridden out that morning to check the north pasture fence. She did not let herself think past that. She tied the mare to a scrubby cedar and ran. She ran through hail and wind with her head down and her arms over her face, stumbling across furrows and stones, the world gone white and howling. She could not feel her hands. She could not hear anything but the storm. She ran anyway, because there was nothing else to do, because that boy was the only boy in the world, and he was somewhere in the white ahead of her. She nearly collided with Micah 50 yards from the ranch house. He had come back from the north pasture at the first change in the sky, reading the weather the way a man who had ranched long enough learns to read it, in the color of the clouds, in the way the animals stilled. His horse was behind him, already turned loose to find its own shelter. He caught Hattie by the arms when she crashed into him, and she grabbed the front of his coat without thinking. "Danny," she gasped. "Inside," he said, pulling her forward. "I put him in the root cellar before I came for you." He had come for her, in the middle of it. He had seen to the boy, and then turned back into the storm to find her. She could not speak. She held on to his coat and let him pull her the last 50 yards to the house, and they burst through the door into the sudden muffled dark of shelter, both of them streaming water, both of them breathing hard. The hail hammered the roof like 1,000 fists. He looked at her face, checking for injury. She looked at his. There was a cut above his ear from the hail, and he had not noticed it. "You're bleeding," she said. "I'll live." His hands were on her shoulders, steadying her. They did not move. The storm screamed outside. Beneath the floor they could hear Danny singing to himself, low and tuneless, the way he did when he was concentrating on being brave. "I've decided," Hattie said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Micah waited. "I'll stay. Not just for him," she met his eyes. "For you." His hands tightened on her shoulders, just once, and then he let out a breath that had been held a long time, and she understood that he had been holding it for much longer than 3 days. They got Danny up from the cellar. He emerged blinking and slightly dusty, assessed both of them with his characteristic gravity, and announced that Micah's head needed cleaning. He said it as though he had always had a say in such matters, which Hattie supposed he now did. She cleaned the cut. Micah sat still and let her. Danny watched from the other side of the table and said nothing more, which was its own kind of approval. The storm passed by evening, leaving the prairie scoured and new-smelling. The three of them ate supper by lamplight with the door open to the cool, washed air. Nobody said much. It was one of those meals where the quiet itself is a kind of grace. They were married before the first frost by the circuit preacher who came through every 6 weeks. It was a plain ceremony with no guests but the land itself. Danny stood between them and held Hattie's hand during the vows, as though she might need anchoring. She did not, but she was glad for his hand all the same. The ranch house gained small changes in the weeks that followed. A second coat on the hook, a row of letters pinned above the fireplace in Danny's careful hand, a pot of something warm always simmering on the back of the stove. The single tin cup was joined by 2 more. At night, after Danny slept, Micah would sit beside Hattie on the porch and watch the stars come out over the prairie, and he would take her hand in both of his and hold it and say nothing, 'cause nothing needed to be said. The house behind them held laughter and warmth, and the quiet breath of a sleeping boy who had once sat on a strange porch with nowhere to belong. He belonged now. So did she. So did Micah. That was the whole of it, and it was everything.